everybody, it's Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary, and I'm here with Tao Seti, also known as TC from Reach Out Reptiles. Today is Saturday, March 21st, 2020, and in this edition of Super Dwarf Sunday, we're going to compare TC's size to a few other things. I think my assistant Jim is going to bring some common items in here to set next to TC so that you can get an idea of what size he is now. But first, let's talk about how much TC weighs. He's 277 grams. TC was hatched June 6th, 2019. So that makes him about 9.5 months old. In just a couple of weeks, he's going to be 10 months old, so just a couple of months shy of 1 year old. And one of the questions I get frequently since working with a super dwarf reticulated python is, how big is he going to get? How big is he? What's his size like compared to other snakes? Tonight's video is going to address the question of how big is he, how much does he weigh, etc. So we're going to weigh and look at a couple of other snakes. We're going to look at him compared to some common items. And this is what TC looks like around this. What's a bunch of bananas called? I don't even know. But there's like 8 bananas here, and this is his size next to these bananas. Are you going to bring us another common item?
Sure.
Assistant Jim is going to bring us another common item to give you all an idea of TC's size. So we're going to set the bananas aside. This is Jim's iPad. I don't know what size and version of iPad this is. But here is TC next to and on the iPad. But this is his size compared to, I guess, what is an average iPad. And if you didn't catch it before, I weighed him, and I'll just put this on here and push tear. That's best. 277 grams. And you can come out now, TC. All right, you seem very, very small after I was holding that Morelia red light. But let's talk a little bit about size and weight. He's 277 grams, so he's not quite 300 grams yet. I just upped his meal size to weaned rats, and I tend to feed light, and I tend to stretch his feedings at least 10 days to 2 weeks. Garrett warned me about not overfeeding retics when he first sent him to me, and so I've been very careful about that. So I've been on the conservative side as far as the size and frequency of meals. And what I want to talk about a little bit are some factors that might influence the size of your snake in general and your retic specifically. When people ask me, and I know they ask Garrett all of the time, how big can I expect my super dwarf to get? I can't really answer that. And Garrett would be better to answer that because he knows his animals' lineages, he knows where they came from, he knows what the parents and the grandparents look like. He knows what size they attained, and he's going to know what size any siblings attained from the clutch that you're possibly considering. So how large your snake gets or how small they remain may be determined by several factors, or possibly even a combination of these factors. How large or small your snake ends up getting may depend on several factors, which could include species genetics, individual genetics, epigenetics, the presence of or absence of parasite, the presence of or absence of illness or disease, how much you feed your snake, how often you feed your snake, and what you feed your snake, the size of the meals you feed your snake, how much exercise your snake gets, and how stressed your snake is or isn't. All of these things may influence the ultimate size of your snake. The important thing to remember is that there's going to be individual variation within a species, and there's going to be variation in size and weight among individuals within that species, and that you shouldn't necessarily compare your snake to others, thinking that your snake is too big or too small. If your snake is in good body condition, is free from disease, illness, or parasites, is active and behaving normally as they should, then you shouldn't necessarily worry about how much they weigh or what size they are. What you should be focusing on is your snake healthy? Are they content? And do they experience good welfare in their daily life? If your snake has good body condition, if your snake is behaving normally, if they're eating well, and if they're free from illness, disease, and parasites, then your snake is the size it is. And reticulated pythons are going to have a minimum and maximum range that most animals are going to fall within the middle of. That isn't to say that you can't have aberrant genetics or that you can't have something happen that's really abnormal and you get a super small retic or you get a super ginormous retic. For those of you who are asking this question about super dwarf reticulated pythons or dwarf reticulated pythons and how large is my dwarf or super dwarf going to get, I really refer you to Reach Out Reptiles. Talk to Garrett Hartle. If you get an animal from him, he's going to be able to give you an idea of the expected size of your potential animal because he's going to know what size the parents have been, possibly even the grandparents. He's going to know what size siblings have turned out to be. You're going to know how those hatchlings were raised up, how they were fed, and all of those factors that I mentioned earlier, he's going to be able to tell you about. When Garrett sent TC here for me to work with, I was very clear that I wasn't able to handle a really super large snake, and he promised me that TC wouldn't get larger than a bredli. Well, he's not a year old yet. He's not 300 grams yet. I do tend to feed kind of on the light side and infrequently, but he's in good body condition, and he's lean and he's strong. He gets a lot of exercise. He spends a lot of time outside of his enclosure exercising, climbing, and moving around. And so he's got a lot more lean muscle than he does any type of fat. I think he's in good shape, but I just recently moved him up to weaned rats at his last feeding. This is Bora. He is about a 2.5-year-old Brettles python. He's one of the Brettles pythons that comes out quite a bit and uses our activity spaces. I'm going to see if he allows me to weigh him so that we can get some comparisons for you about size and weights. Now he will turn 3 years old in July of 2020, so that's in just a few months from now. Let me see if I can get him to stay on here long enough to catch his weight. Bora, he's quite active and he is used to being out, so he really doesn't have any fear about climbing right off of anything onto other stuff. No, all right. Why can't you know what? We could put you in a bin and weigh the whole bin. Let's do that. Or to putting him in a bin with the lid on it. So we're weighing that within a minute. It's 2657. Remember that. 2657 with him in it. Now I'm going to go ahead and put him into one of our exercise spaces. That'll make him happy. So the empty bin is 1559. So do the math. So he weighs about 1,100 grams. All right, I brought out our adult corn snake. I've heard Garrett mention corn snakes and their adult size in relation to super dwarf retics many times. And so I thought I would show you an example of an adult corn snake. This is Sunny. He is our 10-year-old male adult corn snake. And then here is TC next to him. And remember, TC is not a year old yet. He's just going on 10 months old. So TC is going to grow more. But I just wanted to kind of show you, this is a 10-year-old adult corn snake, Pantherophis guttatus. And then this is a 10-month-old, 62.5% Calatoa super dwarf reticulated python. Can you come get Sunny? Just put him back in his enclosure. think if I had a snake that was about the same age as Talcetti, so that I could show you some size comparison. And the snake that I have that is closest in age to Talcetti is this corn snake, Normal. Yes, that's his name because he's the normal wild type coloration, which I absolutely love. But Normal was hatched July 5th, 2019. Talcetti was hatched June 6th, 2019. So they are almost the exact same age. They're just a month apart. Talcetti is just 1 month older than Normal. And obviously there is quite a size difference between Normal and Talcetti for snakes of the same age. And you can see I'm going to share one other size comparison with you and then we will be done. This is one of my Morelia bredli males and he was hatched on August 23rd, 2018. So he is a 1.5 years old, whereas Talcetti is only 10 months old. And as you can see, there's still quite a size difference. Now, some of my other 2018 Bredl's Pythons are a little bit bigger than this. But I just wanted to show you a 2018 male bredli compared to a 2019 male super dwarf retic. Good boy, Ronan. If you have questions about the size of snakes in general, you should look up the specific species that you're curious about. And better yet, find somebody who works with those snakes, as in keeps them or breeds them. And I'm certainly happy to talk with you about Morelia spilota, Morelia bredli, because that is what I work with more than anything else. Although I do have a small collection of corn snakes and a couple of bull snakes as well, I generally work with Morelia spilota and Morelia bredli. So now that you've seen a glimpse of TC compared to some common household items, and you've seen TC as compared to some other types and ages of snakes that we have here, let's talk a little bit about what size enclosure we have Talcetti in. TC's in a 4-foot long enclosure and it is 18 inches high. TC seems very content in that size. The reason I say that is within his enclosure he exhibits green zone behaviors. He's very relaxed and all of the behavior that he exhibits in his enclosure is relaxed and content. He is not longer than his enclosure. At this point in his life, his enclosure is longer than he is. And that's the way I like to keep it with most of my snakes. I like to keep the enclosure length as long as the snakes are so that they can stretch out in a rectilinear position. Now, some of the snakes I have in enclosures that aren't quite as long or longer than they are, so there's always going to be exceptions. Most of my exceptions are because those snakes come out almost every night. Like the snake that you see behind me, Bora, he comes out almost every single night. And so his enclosure to him is literally just the place where he sleeps and rests. And it's almost like his refugia, or his hide is actually his enclosure, and his habitat is the room, or in his case, the whole house. Because he doesn't even live in this room. He traveled from the room he lives in, out of his enclosure, down the hallway and into this room. And he does that quite often. Of course, he's always supervised. If you're able to do that with your snake, and your snake is confident enough and has shown a preference for coming out of their enclosure and engaging in activity in your home safely and supervised, then you might be able to get away with a little bit smaller enclosure because the snake's just using it to rest in. But if your snake is hardly ever leaving their enclosure, if your snake is in their enclosure and when given the opportunity to come out, they don't, if they clearly have indicated a preference for not coming out of their enclosure, for staying within their enclosure, then I always advocate for a large enough enclosure that the snake can completely stretch out in a rectilinear position, because they're spending 24/7 in that habitat and they need to be able to be active in it and move around. So TC's habitat right now is longer than he is, and he seems content in there because when I do open the door and give him opportunities to come out, he hardly ever does. And that was not the case when I had him in a quarantine tub. When Taucetti first arrived here and he was in a quarantine tub, he was always trying to get out. And after he had been out, it was a struggle to get him back into the tub. And that all changed when I put him into the 4-foot enclosure. In fact, at the time I put him in the 4-foot enclosure, he was even smaller than this and didn't really need to be in a 4-foot enclosure. But what I have found with this super dwarfer tick is he's very, very active, but he's also a little bit shy and reserved. So he enjoys being active in an environment where he feels secure and safe. And for him, that's his 4-foot enclosure. Since moving him into that enclosure, Taucetti is extremely active. He uses every inch of that enclosure every night. He gets up, he climbs around all the ledges, all the perches. He swims in not only his swimming pool, but in his water dish. He uses his tunnels. He gets up high, he gets in the substrate. He's super active, and yet when I open the door, he likes to sit on the threshold and look out, but he doesn't hardly ever try to come out. Even when I've left it open for hours, he'll often just sit there at the threshold or just stick the front part of his body out. Since moving him into that enclosure with all of the enclosure furnishings in it, he just seems so content that he doesn't want to come out, and that wasn't the case at all with his tub. So I will be interested to see that as TC gets older and larger, what size enclosure we end up giving him. Now, if he doesn't end up getting super large, he might be able to stay in that 4-foot enclosure or maybe move up to a 6-foot enclosure. If he gets really large, then we'll have to look at other options. But as of right now, his enclosure is still longer than he is, and he is very content inside it. So I just thought I would mention that as something to think about when you're thinking about getting a reticulated python, is you have to plan for the enclosure size and realize that these are really active snakes. And I'm gauging their activity level just based on one specimen, and that's Taucetti. He's very active, but he's also what I would consider reserved and shy, so he likes to be active within his enclosure. And when he's out of his enclosure, he actually moves around less, and he drapes and perches more, and he's very cautious about his exploration outside of his enclosure. That may change as he gets bigger and older. The bredli, on the other hand, are extremely active outside of their enclosures. Many of them want out quite frequently. In fact, some of them want out every night and become quite upset if I don't let them out. And they're obviously very outgoing. They travel all around the house. They don't hide. They don't drape and perch much. They stay on the move. And then when they go back in their enclosures, they're pretty much just resting. The only time I really see them utilizing all the space within their enclosures is if I haven't given them exercise opportunities out of their enclosure, and then they pace the front or the door incessantly. And so every species of snake is going to be a little bit different. And then you're going to have variations in temperament and personality within snakes, even of the same species. When I do these Super Dwarf Sunday videos, it's important that you understand I'm only working with one super dwarf, and that's Taucetti. Anything I say is based just on my experience with him. And I only have certain snakes to compare his behavior to, although I have a lot of them. I have almost 30 bredli and about 24 Morelia spilota. That's what I'm comparing his personality to, his activity level to, and his size to, because that's what I have the most experience with. Well, everybody, thanks for watching. This has been Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary. I have been joined tonight by Taucetti from Reach Out Reptiles. I hope that this was a fun video for you and gave you some idea of Taucetti's size as compared to some other snakes of different types and ages, and compared to some common household items. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. As always, remember to try and be kind and love your animals.